I had been looking forward to this evening all week. Just me, my couch, a cold drink, and maybe a little TV before bed. Nothing fancy, nothing dramatic, just a quiet Wednesday in my little slice of suburban heaven. My street always looked perfect, with its manicured lawns and identical mailboxes, the kind of neighborhood that makes you wonder if anyone actually had fun here or just polished their cars and counted their sprinklers. And then there was Karen. You know the type, sharp, blonde, perfectly coiffed hair, and a personality that somehow made every HOA meeting feel like a congressional hearing. I dealt with her before small disputes, her over-the-top warnings, and her very specific idea of what counted as community standards. But I'd never had a direct confrontation like this, and honestly, I wasn't in the mood for it tonight. I reached my front door and jammed my key into the lock. Nothing. I jiggled it, twisted it, muttered under my breath, and tried again. Still nothing. Weird. My hand slipped a little on the key. I glanced up, and there she was, Karen, smiling, grinning, and in her hand, a shiny, metallic master key. "Just checking," she said, voice sweet but sharp, the kind of sweetness that screams danger. "You know, routine inspection." I froze. Routine inspection, my door, my home. Was she joking? "Karen, what are you doing?" I asked, keeping my voice calm but firm. Her grin widened, and she tilted her head, master key dangling like some sort of ceremonial scepter. "Oh, nothing, just making sure everything is up to code. You wouldn't want the HOA to get upset, would you?" I blinked. Everything in me screamed to step back. That key looked serious. It looked like it could open any door in my neighborhood, and the way she held it like she had absolute authority made my stomach twist. I tried to laugh it off. "Karen, I appreciate the concern, but this is my house. You don't need a master key to check anything." Her smile faltered ever so slightly, just enough for me to notice. And then she said the words no one ever wants to hear. "Oh, I do need this key. HOA rules, you know it's my right." She jammed the key into my door. Not gently, not carefully, she shoved it. My door resisted, the lock groaning. I held my breath, hoping it wouldn't break. Karen's expression turned stern, almost victorious, like she was about to prove some massive point. "I just have to make sure everything is perfect," she said, almost whispering now. Her tone had shifted from sweet neighbor to total enforcer. I took a step back, my mind racing. Why does she need a master key? Why now? And why am I feeling like I'm about to star in some suburban horror movie? She started muttering something about possible violations and responsibility, waving the master key like it was a magic wand. I held up my hands. "Karen, stop, you can't just..." She cut me off mid-sentence. "I can and I will. HOA regulations aren't suggestions, they're rules, and rules are, well, rules." I tried not to laugh, but the absurdity of the situation was overwhelming. My door wouldn't budge. Karen was acting like she was uncovering a crime scene, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I could hear my neighbors peeking out their windows, probably whispering, "What is she doing now?" Then it hit me. This could escalate fast, very fast. If she called the police, she could make it sound like I was tampering with her property. And there she was, standing there, the self-appointed guardian of my neighborhood's perfect lawns, looking like she was about to declare me a criminal. I took a deep breath. Calm was key. I couldn't let her rattle me, not yet, not until I had a plan. And that's when I realized something chilling. Karen wasn't just here to inspect. She was here to control. And that master key in her hand, it was the first move in what was about to become a full-blown HOA showdown. I stepped back, eyeing her, trying to gauge just how far she'd go. And that's when she muttered, almost gleefully, "If you touch this key, I'll call the cops. You'll see, theft, right under my nose." My stomach dropped. Theft. For a key she jammed in my door, my quiet Wednesday was officially over. And I had a feeling this was only the beginning. I stood there staring at Karen, my mind running in circles. She had her master key lodged in my door like a tiny metallic wedge of authority, and she was muttering about theft. Theft, over a key, my home. I wanted to laugh, but the look in her eyes told me she wasn't joking, not at all. "Karen," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice calm, "you can't just..." "Oh, I can," she interrupted, voice sharp now, cutting like glass. "It's right here in the HOA rulebook, Section 14, Paragraph 3. I have the authority to enter any property in the name of supervision. And you," she paused dramatically, like she was about to deliver the verdict of the century, "are violating it." I raised an eyebrow. "Violating it? How exactly? My grass isn't brown, my mailbox isn't crooked, my house isn't exploding. I don't see the problem." She didn't answer. Instead, she jabbed the master key again. This time it got stuck deeper. I winced as the lock groaned. My hand hovered near hers, not touching, just in case, but she flinched like I'd tried to rip the key from her fingers. "Step back," I said, keeping my voice low but steady. "You're going to break the lock." I'm protecting this community, she snapped, waving her finger like a wand of justice. And you are testing me. Neighbors started peeking out their windows, curious murmurs floating through the air. Some leaned over fences, some craned their necks from porches, and I could swear someone across the street was filming the whole thing. Great, just great. Karen took a step closer, tightening her grip on the key. If you touch this key, if you dare, I'll call the police. You'll see, you'll pay for this theft. I froze. Okay, that was new. She wasn't just dramatic. She was weaponizing the law, or at least her version of it. My brain scrambled. What now? Argue? Try to pull the key out? Walk away? Every option seemed equally ridiculous and potentially catastrophic. Look, Karen, I said, trying to reason with her, I'm not touching your key. You've jammed it in my door. Why don't you remove it and we can talk? She gasped, clutching her chest like I'd insulted the HOA itself. Talk, she said, voice high and trembly. You don't get it. You can't negotiate with violation. You don't understand. And then she did something I wasn't expecting. She dialed her phone, holding the key in one hand and tapping the screen with the other. Yes, officer, I need assistance. There's a thief, yes, at my door trying to steal my key at my property. I blinked, my jaw tightened. I had exactly 2 seconds to consider whether I should explain my side of the story before things got real, really real. Karen, I said, trying to inject calm into the chaos, you cannot call the police over a key stuck in a lock. That's not how this works. Oh, it is, she shot back. It's completely valid, and when the police arrive, they'll see who's at fault. I glanced around. The neighbors were now leaning out of their windows fully, some whispering excitedly. This was turning into a spectacle. My street had never been so dramatic. Karen began packing now, muttering rules under her breath, as if reciting them aloud would summon some magical enforcement power. She flailed her free hand, gesturing wildly. One neighbor laughed softly, another shook their head. I took a slow, deep breath. Stay calm, document, don't escalate. She clearly had the drama in full swing, and I didn't want to give her a single reason to spin it further. And then, as if timed perfectly, I heard it, the low hum of sirens in the distance. Karen's eyes widened. She didn't look angry now. She looked panicked, almost like she realized she might have called in reinforcements for a crime that didn't exist. I swallowed hard. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. And as the red and blue lights reflected off the windows down the street, I couldn't help but think my quiet Wednesday was officially gone. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing: Karen had no idea who she was dealing with. The low hum of sirens grew louder, bouncing off the perfectly manicured lawns and shiny mailboxes of my street. Karen froze mid-gesture, her master key still stuck in my door, her phone pressed to her ear. I could practically hear her panicked thoughts. Did I overdo it? Are they going to take me seriously? 2 police officers pulled up in a cruiser, uniformed and professional, stepping out cautiously. The neighborhood had gone from quiet suburbia to front row spectatorship in less than 5 minutes. A few neighbors were now fully leaning out their windows, whispering, some even pointing. My little street had officially turned into a scene from a reality show. Karen practically threw her phone at the ground, bouncing on her heels. Officers, yes, I caught this man, this thief, trying to tamper with my master key at my property. You have to arrest him. I couldn't help but let out a small, incredulous laugh. Officers, wait, this is ridiculous, I said, raising my hand slowly, palms open. She stuck her key in my door. I haven't touched it. There's nothing to arrest me for. The officers looked at each other, eyebrows raised. Officer 1 cleared his throat. Ma'am, sir, let's take it slow. Can you explain what's happening here? Karen, undeterred, puffed up her chest and launched into a rapid-fire explanation. He's stealing, he's tampering, I caught him red-handed, he's threatening HOA property. She waved the master key like a scepter of justice. He doesn't respect the rules, he's a danger to this community. Officer 2 raised a hand. Ma'am, we need calm here, could you step back for a moment? Karen huffed but didn't move. Instead, she glared at me like I was personally responsible for every HOA infraction in the history of suburbia. Meanwhile, I pulled out my phone, quietly recording everything. If there was ever time to have evidence, it was now. I explained my side calmly, emphasizing the facts. Officers, this is my home, I have the keys. She is holding a master key that belongs to the HOA. She jammed it into my door, I haven't touched it. She called you claiming I'm stealing her key. The officers glanced at each other again, this time exchanging looks that said, yeah, this is messy. One officer crouched slightly, inspecting the door. Ma'am, he said to Karen, it looks like your key is jammed in the door. Are you sure you need to call the police over this? Karen's face turned red. It's a violation, it's crime, theft, he. Officer 1 interrupted, voice calm but firm. Ma'am, it appears no crime has been committed. The homeowner here has every right to be inside their own home. If your key is stuck, that's unfortunate but not a crime. Karen's jaw dropped. The grip on her master key tightened for a fraction of a second, then slackened. She opened her mouth to argue, but all I could hear was the faint laughter of neighbors now, barely stifled behind their curtains. I caught one neighbor filming, probably whispering, "Oh wow, she's losing it." I stayed calm, my heart was still racing, but I reminded myself, patience wins. The officers were already seeing the truth. Karen was spinning a wild story, and the more she gesticulated, the less believable she became. "You see," I said quietly just to Karen, my voice low but steady, "this isn't about rules, this isn't about inspection, this is about control, and the moment you involve the police without cause, it just proves it." Karen opened her mouth, sputtering, trying to regain control, but no one was listening anymore. Not the officers, not the neighbors, not even me. Her panic was like a spotlight, and she couldn't hide from it. One of the officers stepped closer to the door, carefully dislodging the master key. Karen's eyes widened, then narrowed, then widened again as the key slipped out without a scratch. Her face went through a strange combination of relief, outrage, and disbelief. I exhaled a slow, deliberate breath. "It's really okay, Karen. No one is going to get in trouble. You don't need to prove anything right now." Her hands trembled, and for a second I almost felt pity. Almost. But then she opened her mouth again, muttering about the HOA and my authority before quickly realizing the officers weren't buying it. And just like that, the tension shifted. The neighbors who had been watching silently now started whispering, exchanging looks of amusement and disbelief. Karen's dramatic display had officially lost its audience and credibility. I knew in that moment this wasn't just about a key. It was about control, overreach, and the spectacle of it all. And Karen was going to have to face the reality that not every suburban resident would bend to her theatrics. The officers were polite, calm, professional. Karen, frozen mid-rant, master key dangling uselessly in her hand. And me, standing there, a mixture of relief and anticipation, knowing this wasn't over, but for now I'd won the first round. The police had left, still exchanging polite, almost amused glances with each other. Karen, however, was not so easily dismissed. She stood on my front lawn, hands on her hips, the master key now dangling limply at her side like a defeated trophy. But the fire in her eyes told me one thing: this wasn't over. I exhaled slowly, trying to calm the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. My door was intact, my keys were in my hand, and for the moment justice, or at least common sense, had prevailed. But Karen had always been the type to escalate. And if there was one thing I knew about HOA Karen, it was that she never backed down quietly. "You think you've won, don't you?" she said, voice dripping with venom. "The police left, but that doesn't mean this ends here. I'll have the HOA board involved. You'll regret this." I smiled, trying to keep my voice level. "Karen, the board isn't going to do anything. I'm within my rights. You're the one who tried to jam your master key into my door. That's not exactly a strong argument." She gasped, clutching her chest dramatically. "Not strong, not strong. Do you know how much effort I put into maintaining the standards of this community?" I couldn't help but chuckle softly. "Standards, really?" "Yes, Karen, I see all the effort you put into policing door locks and waving keys around." Her jaw tightened. I could see her trying to summon a witty comeback, but none came. The neighbors had now fully gathered, leaning from windows, peeking from behind fences, some even standing in driveways. It was like a small audience had formed, and Karen was the star of her own private tragedy. Then she did the unthinkable. She tried to block my path. I had just stepped forward to close my door when she positioned herself between me and the sidewalk, arms crossed, as if sheer force of will could stop me from leaving. "You will not walk away from this," she snapped. "I have authority." I raised an eyebrow. "Authority? You mean the kind you pretend to have with a master key?" I moved slowly, deliberately, giving her the chance to step aside. She didn't. Her foot tapped, her glare sharp, but I didn't flinch. The tension was thick, almost tangible. Neighbors whispered to each other, some laughing quietly, others holding their phones out, filming. Karen looked around, realizing for the first time that her little drama wasn't private anymore. She was the spectacle. I took a deep breath. "Karen, step aside. You're making this worse for yourself." Her face turned red, and for a moment I thought she might actually try something, like reach for the key again or yell louder than humanly possible. But then something shifted. Her bravado wavered, her stance softened slightly. She realized that this wasn't going to go her way. I continued, my voice calm but firm. Look, we both want the neighborhood to stay nice. I respect the rules, I follow the rules. But this isn't a rule, it's not enforcement, it's a tantrum. That seemed to hit her harder than anything I said. Karen's shoulders sagged slightly, and her eyes darted around at the crowd of neighbors staring at her. She muttered something under her breath, clearly aware that this scene was not painting her in a favorable light. I didn't move closer, I didn't raise my voice. I simply stepped past her slowly, my body language calm, confident, unthreatened. The crowd seemed to hold its breath, and then, as if on cue, Karen froze completely. Not because I said anything, not because I did anything. She froze because she finally realized that she had lost. Right there on my front lawn in front of everyone, her master key had failed, her theatrics had failed, and for the first time in this escalating feud, Karen had no authority left to cling to. I walked past her straight into my house, door clicking securely behind me. Silence fell. A few neighbors whispered congratulations from their windows, others clapped quietly, and Karen, she just stood there frozen, her face a mix of shock, disbelief, and perhaps a little humiliation. I leaned against the door, finally letting out the breath I'd been holding for what felt like hours. My house was safe, my door was intact, and I had survived Karen's master key drama unscathed. But I knew one thing, this wasn't the end. HOA Karen would regroup, she would plot, she would find another way to assert control. The difference now was that everyone had seen the truth, and her power, the kind she so desperately clung to, was gone. And as I looked out my window at her still standing figure, fumbling with the key in her hand like it had betrayed her, I couldn't help but smirk. Tomorrow she'd probably tell the entire neighborhood about how she almost caught a thief. But tonight I had won. The night air was thick with tension, even after the police had left. I closed my front door behind me, but I didn't sit down. Something told me this wasn't over. Karen was still out there, packing on my lawn like a lioness who had just been denied her prey. Her master key dangled uselessly from her fingers, glinting under the streetlight. I could hear whispers outside my window. Neighbors were peeking, some leaning over fences, others standing on porches with their phones raised. It was like a small-town audience had gathered for a one-woman drama show, HOA Karen versus the uncooperative homeowner. Karen's voice carried through the quiet night. This isn't finished, you'll see, I'll have the board involved, you won't get away with this. I couldn't help but smirk. She sounded like a cartoon villain, waving her key around for dramatic effect. I leaned against the door and whispered to myself, little does she know, the real trick isn't the key, it's patience. But Karen wasn't done. She decided the next move was to make the crowd her allies, or at least intimidate them into fear. She straightened her back, cleared her throat, and started shouting about how she was protecting the neighborhood, about violations, and about the sacred duty of the HOA. The neighbors, however, weren't impressed. Some laughed quietly, others rolled their eyes, and one brave soul called out, "You're insane, Karen." Karen froze, mid-gesture, glaring at the voice like it had personally insulted her family lineage. Her lips trembled as she tried to regain control of her narrative, but it was clear she was losing. I realized this was my moment. I stepped to the window, speaking just loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Folks," I said calmly, "this isn't about rules or violations. This is about one person trying to control everyone else with a key that doesn't belong to her." There was a murmur of agreement, heads nodded, phones raised to record. Karen's face shifted from anger to panic. She clearly hadn't counted on me turning the crowd against her. She lunged slightly, waving her key like a baton. "You'll regret this, you think you're clever, you think you're safe, I have authority, I can." I opened the front door just a crack and smiled. "You can threaten all you want, Karen, but standing here in front of your neighbors screaming about keys and violations isn't authority, it's a tantrum." Her mouth opened, then closed, opened again, words failed her. The audience outside was now fully engaged, some whispering, others laughing quietly. The master key no longer seemed intimidating, it was a prop in her personal comedy show. I realized then that the power dynamic had shifted. Karen had all the bravado, but I had calm, facts, and witnesses. Every neighbor staring through their windows, every whisper, every phone recording was proof that she had lost control. Then came the subtle humor, the small, unplanned moments that made the situation even more ridiculous. One neighbor peeked over the fence and muttered, "She looks like she's auditioning for a reality TV show." Another whispered to their child, "Watch closely, this is like a live soap opera." I couldn't help but smile quietly to myself. But I knew better than to underestimate her. Karen was smart in the sense that she could scheme and escalate when pushed. I just needed to keep my cool and make sure the next move was mine, not hers. I leaned back inside my door and whispered under my breath, little does she know the next step isn't yelling, it's strategy. Karen's packing slowed. She looked around at the gathering crowd, realization dawning. She wasn't the center of control anymore, she was the spectacle, and for the first time I saw real fear flicker in her eyes. It was in that moment I knew part 2 of this HOA showdown was about to begin. Karen would escalate, she would try to reclaim her so-called authority, but she wouldn't be expecting what I had planned. And as I peeked through the window, seeing her still fumbling with her master key, muttering threats that no one took seriously, I felt a surge of satisfaction. This neighborhood had watched her theatrics, and now they had seen who the real homeowner in control was. Tonight, the lawn wasn't just a stage for Karen's tantrum, it was the proving ground, and I had won the first round, but the game was far from over. I had been waiting for the perfect moment. Karen was still out there packing, clutching her master key like it was Excalibur itself, muttering about violations and board meetings. The neighbors were still watching, some whispering excitedly, others silently filming. The tension in the air was almost suffocating, but I knew exactly what I needed to do. I opened my closet and pulled out my uniform. Not just any uniform, but one that commanded respect, something that immediately conveyed authority without me saying a word. My heart raced with a mix of nerves and anticipation. Karen's overconfidence had reached its peak. Now it was time for the reveal. I stepped outside, buttoned up and straightened my posture. My boots clicked on the pavement as I walked toward the front yard. The neighbors went quiet instantly, their whispers fading into stunned silence. Karen's eyes widened the moment she saw me. For a second, time seemed to stop. She froze mid-step, the master key still dangling limply in her hand. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. She couldn't speak. She couldn't move. Her usual confidence, her authority, her bluster, it all evaporated in an instant. I smiled calmly. "Karen," I said, my voice steady, projecting just enough authority to cut through her panic. "It's really not about the key. It's about understanding boundaries. And right now, you're standing on someone else's property, waving a tool that doesn't belong to you." Her lips trembled, trying to form a response. This isn't fair," she stammered. "No, it's not fair," I replied, taking a slow step forward. "It's reality. You can't use fear or threats to control other people, especially when the law, the HOA, and common sense are on my side." She glanced at the neighbors. They were all staring, some with wide eyes, others shaking their heads. No one was taking her seriously. Her master key, once a symbol of her imagined authority, now looked small and ridiculous in her hand. I have authority," she cried, her voice cracking. "I enforce the rules." I chuckled lightly, keeping my tone calm, almost amused. "Karen, authority doesn't come from a key or shouting at your neighbors. Authority comes from respect, from doing the right thing. You've lost both tonight." Her eyes darted back and forth, realizing everyone was watching. The whispers, the phone recordings, the silent judgment, it was all evidence that she had lost control. I could see the panic rising, the desperation. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Then I did something deliberate. I walked past her slowly, boots clicking on the pavement, each step measured. She didn't move. She couldn't. She was frozen, mid-rant, mid-gesture, mid-madness. The crowd outside let out a low murmur, some clapping quietly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Karen's face went pale. She was no longer in charge, no one was afraid of her. And the master key, completely irrelevant. I stopped at my door, turned, and looked back at her. "You can step back inside now, Karen. Maybe rethink how you handle things. Or maybe you'll start understanding the difference between rules and intimidation." Her hands trembled. The key slipped from her fingers and clattered to the ground. For a moment, she simply stared at it, then at me, then at the crowd of neighbors who were still watching. I could almost see the gears turning in her head, trying to salvage dignity, trying to recover her pride, but it was too late. I closed my door behind me, leaving Karen standing there, frozen, humiliated, and powerless. The tension lingered for a moment, thick and palpable. Then slowly, the neighbors started whispering again, some laughing quietly, some nodding in approval. I leaned against my door, heart racing, a small smile on my face. For the first time that night, I felt a sense of control, of calm. Karen had played her hand, and I had turned it against her. The master key that had once been her weapon was now a symbol of her defeat. Tonight, I had not only protected my home, but I had also exposed Karen's overreach to the entire neighborhood. And as I watched her finally retreat, muttering under her breath, I knew this showdown had only strengthened my position. The quiet satisfaction of victory mixed with a small, cheeky thought, maybe next time she'd think twice before trying to turn a key into a weapon. The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed like a beehive on caffeine. Word of Karen's dramatic meltdown had spread fast, probably faster than she realized. From behind lace curtains to front porch railings, every neighbor had a story to tell or a phone ready to replay last night's spectacle. And I watched it all unfold from the safety of my home, a quiet sense of satisfaction settling in. Karen, however, was not quiet. She had retreated to her own house, but I could see her through the window, packing, muttering, and occasionally waving her hands as if the universe had personally betrayed her. She was already calling the HOA board, recounting her horrific ordeal, and I knew full well she was embellishing every word. But here's the thing, the neighbors weren't buying it. As I stepped outside to get the morning paper, whispers followed me down the street. "Did you see her last night?" one neighbor asked, shaking his head. She actually thought she could intimidate him. "I know," another chimed in, laughter barely contained. "And that key, it's like she was auditioning for a soap opera." Even the kids on the block had caught wind of it. They pointed and whispered as I walked by, some with wide-eyed admiration. It was surreal. Suddenly I realized something. Karen's overreach had backfired spectacularly. She hadn't intimidated anyone, she had alienated herself. And yet she wasn't done. Oh no, Karen had a plan, she always did. By mid-morning, she emerged onto her lawn, clipboard in hand, determined to regain her so-called authority. She strutted toward me, trying to muster whatever power she could from last night's theatrics. "You think you've won," she said, voice tight with forced confidence. "But the HOA board will hear about this. They'll see who the real violator is." I shook my head slowly, amused. "Karen, the board already saw last night, and so did the neighbors. I'm pretty sure your violator argument isn't going to hold up." Her face flushed a deep red, a mixture of frustration and panic. "You think everyone is against me, you." I held up a hand. "I don't think anything. I know you've lost credibility. You turned a master key into a spectacle and everyone saw it. Even now, you're standing there waving a clipboard like it's a weapon. You're not intimidating anyone, you're entertaining them." A few neighbors peered over their fences, clearly agreeing with me. Karen noticed them, glanced nervously, and tried to wave them off. But the damage was done. Her grand performance had made her the punchline. Karen took a step closer, trying one last desperate tactic. I have authority. You can't just walk away from this. It's a violation." I smiled, calm and collected. "Karen, authority isn't about waving keys, yelling, or trying to control everyone around you. Authority is earned, and last night you lost it." Her jaw dropped. She looked around at the neighbors, some smirking, some shaking their heads, some whispering in disbelief. She realized finally that no one was on her side. The whispers weren't sympathy, they were validation for me. She had overplayed her hand, and now she had no one to blame but herself. I could see it in her eyes, the slow recognition of defeat. She turned, muttered something incoherent under her breath, and stomped back toward her house, muttering about next time and the board. The words sounded hollow even to her. I watched her retreat, then turned to the neighbors, giving a small nod. Some waved, some laughed quietly, others just shook their heads in disbelief. I felt a sense of vindication, not just for myself, but for anyone who had ever been bullied by an overzealous HOA member. And in that moment, I realized something important. It wasn't about proving her wrong. It wasn't about confrontation or escalation. It was about standing firm, staying calm, and letting her actions speak louder than her words. Karen had tried to control the narrative. She had tried to manipulate the situation, but in the end, reality, calm, and a little bit of strategy had won. And the neighborhood had seen it all, unfiltered, undeniable, and undeniably entertaining. As I walked back inside, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Karen might try again, she might plot, she might scheme, but for now the neighborhood knew the truth. And sometimes that's all you need: truth, patience, and the courage to stand your ground. By the next day, the neighborhood had settled back into its usual rhythm, but the memory of Karen's meltdown was fresh in everyone's minds. I could hear whispers from windows, soft chuckles from porches, and the occasional "did you see that?" as neighbors passed each other on the sidewalks. Karen had become the story of the week, maybe even the month. I stepped outside, enjoying the crisp morning air, feeling lighter than I had in days. My door was intact, my keys were in my pocket, and the master key that had caused so much chaos was now just a useless piece of metal. I smiled quietly. Sometimes the simplest victories were the sweetest. Karen, of course, was not ready to disappear quietly. She emerged from her house mid-morning, hair perfectly styled despite her humiliation, clipboard in hand, determination etched across her face. She marched down the sidewalk toward me as if rehearsing every word and gesture beforehand. You may have won yesterday, she began, voice trembling slightly, but this isn't over. The HOA board. I held up a hand, smiling calmly. Karen, the board doesn't want to get involved. They've seen what happened. They don't need another master key incident on their records. You've made your point and everyone has seen it. She blinked, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. The neighbors were watching, some leaning on their fences, others peeking from windows. No one was afraid of her anymore. She tried to rally her authority, but it had lost all power. Rules must be enforced, standards must be maintained, she said, voice rising. I chuckled. Karen's standards are important, yes, but intimidation and overreach, that's not enforcement, that's entertainment. Her jaw dropped and she froze mid-sentence. I could see her realizing that her reputation was crumbling faster than she could salvage it. She looked around at the neighbors, realizing they were no longer on her side, that her credibility had evaporated overnight. I took a slow, deliberate step closer, not threatening, just confident. You wanted authority, you wanted control, but that key didn't give you either. Calmness, patience, and respecting boundaries, that's real authority, something you've never understood. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it, muttering something incoherent. I could see the panic, the frustration, the humiliation. She had reached the point where words failed her and her gestures were empty, ineffective. I stepped back, giving her space, and smiled at the gathering neighbors. A few clapped quietly. Others whispered congratulations. A sense of community had quietly formed around the absurdity of the situation, reinforcing that no one should ever try to bully their way into power. Karen turned abruptly and stomped back toward her house, muttering threats under her breath. Her clipboard swung at her side, her master key still useless in her pocket. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, plotting, scheming, planning, but I also knew she would never regain the influence she'd tried so hard to wield. The neighbors dispersed slowly, some stopping to give me nods, thumbs-ups, or quiet smiles. A few even joked about starting a Karen watch, documenting her antics for entertainment rather than fear. I laughed quietly to myself. Humor, after all, was a powerful ally in moments like this. I went back inside my house and leaned against the door, finally exhaling fully. The tension that had gripped me for days melted away. I had faced overreach, intimidation, and absurd accusations, and come out not only unscathed but vindicated. My rights had been respected, my home was secure, and the neighborhood had witnessed the truth. As I looked out my window one last time, I saw Karen standing in her yard, staring at my house. Her posture had shifted. She was smaller somehow, diminished by her own theatrics, and I realized something important. She had taught me a lesson without meaning to. The lesson was this: stand firm, stay calm, and let your actions speak louder than anyone's threats or theatrics. A small laugh escaped me. I thought about the absurdity of it all, the master key jammed in my door, the police called over nothing, the neighbors watching like it was primetime television. And yet, in all that chaos, I had maintained control and dignity. As the sun set over the street, the calm returned. Karen retreated to her house, plotting perhaps, but for now powerless. And me? I finally relaxed, knowing I had turned what could have been a nightmare into a story of quiet triumph, humor, and ultimate vindication. And as I settled in for the evening, I couldn't help but think, next time she tries a master key, maybe I'll just let her jam it in my mailbox and grab the popcorn. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.